And welcome to part 2 of our psychology behavioral health unit. This is pharmacology. So we left off with our benzodiazepines, and so I'm going to continue with benzodiazepines, but this time these are going to be specifically for sleep. So I'm coming a little bit out of order compared to the PowerPoint, but that's okay. So we're talking about, like I said, benzodiazepines for sleep, and so I have this scene here with these children who are sleeping. And just like all the other benzodiazepines, these have the same MOA, which that it augments GABA. So again, we have our garbage can over here for GABA garbage, because we have these babies and babies have diapers and all the other nasty things that babies produce. And so lots of garbage. And so the drugs that are benzodiazepines used for sleep is your flurazepam. So the triplets here, they have the flu. So I have a thermometer, I have tissues, I have this little medication bottle, and then like a ice pack for flurazepam. And over here we have our resting triplets. So we have these three babies, they are resting for the brand name Restoril, which is temazepam. And then the triplets for triazolam. So triplets, triazolam. So resting triplets for Restoril and triazolam. Also in the room, we have the Easter bunny here. So Easter sounds like Esta's a lamb, Easter. And then we have a dollhouse with 4 doors. And so Quazepam kind of sounds like quad meaning 4, and then the brand name Doral, so doors, so dollhouse with 4 doors, Quazepam or Doral. Those are your 5 drugs in this category. And then our adverse effects are represented with the toys that are in the room. So we have adverse effects of sleep driving. So we have a toy car, sleep cooking, so a toy kitchen, and then sleep walking is why we have this little toy soldier here who is walking. Moving on to more drugs that are for sleep, but no longer benzodiazepines, we have the scene on the night of Christmas. So we have Santa, and we have these children nestled all snug in their beds with visions of garbage dancing in their head. And that is because the MOA is the same as a benzodiazepine, but it's not. It still augments GABA. And the drugs in this category are Ambien, that's the brand name. Generic is Zolpidem, but Ambien for ambient noise. So I have this little noise machine here that's making ambient noise. I already mentioned Sonata, so Sonata, which the generic is Zolaplam. And then, of course, Lunesta, just like in the commercials, it's represented by this Luna moth, so this little Lunesta moth. And the adverse effects are the same. We have sleep driving, sleep cooking, and sleep walking. Then just some other drugs for sleep that have a different MOA. So in this picture, we have this kid. He is surveying the sky during the daytime, and he is surveying looking for the Orion constellation. So the MOA, let me mention the drugs first. The drugs in this category here is our Davigio, or lemborexant. And so that's because he is doing some daytime visualization or daytime visualizing. And then he is surveying the sky. So surveying for suvorexant. And then he's looking at Orion because that helps us with our MOA. So the MOA is that orexin or hypocretin antagonists. So it's a orexin antagonist. So that's why there's an Orion and an ant. And orexin is something that regulates our wakefulness, our arousal, and our appetite. So since it's an antagonist, if we block this orexin, we will no longer be able to wake up or be aroused, and therefore you would sleep better. So that's how that works. And then just like the other drugs, they have the same adverse effects. So again, sleepwalking, sleep cooking, sleep driving, any other activities that you would do while sleeping. So a couple more drugs for sleeping. We have Here we have a melon who dropped his ice cream and it is melting. So melting ice cream is to help you remember raw meltian. And he's a melon because this is a melatonin agonist. So melatonin agonist. The adverse effects are sleep driving. So we have a toy car here. Abnormal thinking. So he dropped his ice cream and he was like, yay. So that's kind of abnormal. Normally you'd be sad about dropping your ice cream. And then behavioral changes, kind of the same thing. He's, I don't know, a melon eating ice cream. So that's weird. And then hallucinations. He has crazy eyes that mean he's hallucinating. And then kind of going along with this same picture, we have this dude who he witnessed the very sad ice cream demise and he was like, we need a moment of silence. He's like, oh, I'm sorry, honey, we need a moment of silence. The silence for Selenor. And this guy, he's got a snake tattoo on his arm. Snake, because snakes hissed, they hiss. So histamine antagonist. And his adverse effects, or this drug, doxepin or Selenor, the adverse effects are anticholinergic, so he also has a cactus tattoo, and then orthostatic hypotension. Hypotension is hun, and he's like, oh, sorry, hun, you dropped your ice cream, orthostatic hypotension. And so now I'm going to move on to our first generation neuroleptics. So the neuroleptics are used for bipolar and some other psychiatric diseases, I believe, like schizophrenia and things like that. And so all of our first generations are in this picture. So there is a lot going on here, but basically we have Thor who busted through this wall and he's drinking beer and he's got his luscious locks of hair that he uses swab on and he's got his hammer and he's gonna smash this seed with that this doll is holding, and then there's also some truffles over here. So the MOA, so the only two drugs that were mentioned with the MOA and the adverse effects is our Thorazine and our haloperidol. So I'm going to focus on those first. So Thorazine is a repeat drug that we've learned before, and I just had represented it by Thor's hammer for Thorazine. And it is a dopamine 2 antagonist. So there was 2 dope leads for dopamine 2 antagonist. And there is a small ant in this picture because both of these, both haloperidol and Thorazine, are antagonists. And then, so the adverse effects of Thorazine is EPS. So we have our pyramids, extrapyramidal syndrome, and then anticholinergic. So the doll has a cactus. Now I know it can be confusing because I kind of combined haloperidol and Thorazine because they have a lot of the similar adverse effects. Thorazine also has sedation, so that's why he's smashing the seed with 2 dope leads. And then haloperidol is shown here with a halo doll, so a doll that has a halo over its head, halo or haloperidol, and it is a dopamine 1 and 2 antagonist. So that's why on his legs we have a D1 and a D2 for dopamine 1 and dopamine 2. Again, there's an ant for antagonist. And its adverse effects, again, are EPS, extrapyramidal symptoms, and that is shown here with the pyramid and the pyramid here. Anticholinergic, again, there's a cactus, and then movement disorder, and that is not shown in the picture, but I suppose you could just think that dolls can't move on their own. And so the rest of the drugs in this picture, there's no MOA that was in our notes, no adverse effects. I'm assuming they're probably very similar to the same thing. So I just have ways to remember what these drugs are. So I'll start with Thor. So we already talked about Thor's hammer, so thorazine. And then this one, Thiorazidine. I just think like Thor's full name is Theodore. I know it's not, but just let me have this, okay? So like Theodore for Thiorazidine. And then Thor has really thick thighs for thiophyxine, thick thighs. He has very luscious locks of hair that he has to use swab on. So add a swab. And then he is drinking Stella Artois because he's bougie. So Stella for Stellazine. And then he punched through this wall. He perforated the wall for perfenarazine. And then the reason why he did that is because he wanted to maul some truffles. He wanted to maul the truffles until they were done. So maul until they were done, maladone, and then truffles for trifluoperazine. Anyway, sounds like truffle. And so the whole story is written out here, but that's what all those drugs are. Those are first generation neuroleptics. Now I move on to second generation neuroleptics, and I apologize. This is also a very busy picture, so pay close attention. So we have an apartment here, and there is a person ziplining. That also, the zip line is also doubling as a clothesline, and it's all over land and over some quiet pines. So I will follow what I have written here. So aripiprazole or Abilify is shown here by the airplane. Airplane for aripiprazole, airplane. And it is a partial D2 and 5-HT1A agonist. So to help you remember that it's a partial D2, part of the wings, like the wings are damaged here, both of them. So that has two damaged wings, D2. And then I just wrote 5-HT1A next to it because I don't have a good way to represent that. And it's an agonist. There's no ant. And the adverse effects are sedation, shown right here, QT prolongation, and then our EPS. So we have pyramids for EPS, extrapyramidal symptoms. So that's aripiprazole. And then we have clozapine or clozaril. And so that is shown here with the clothesline. So close for clozapine. And its MOA is that it is a D1 and a D2 antagonist. And so these are denim jackets. We have one denim jacket and two denim jackets. So denim for D1 and D2. It is also a histamine 1 antagonist. So histamine, we have a snake. Snake for histamine because snakes hiss. And then it is also a anticholinergic. That's not an adverse effect. That's part of the MOA. Anticholinergic, ACH. And then its adverse effects are shown here. So sedation, neutropenia. So this is supposed to be like a neutrophil. And then this is the salivating emoji. So salivation. So that's clozapine. Next is quietapine or Seroquel. So that is shown here. So we have this lady is ziplining over some quiet pines for quietapine. This one is also a D1, D2 antagonist, a histamine antagonist, and a 5-HT1A and a 5-HT2 antagonist. So within these quiet pines, we have some holes that were dug. So you dug one hole and then you dug the other, one D1, D2. There's a snake for histamine antagonist. And then we wrote our numbers 5-HT2 and 5-HT1A written on the sides. Adverse effects are EPS. Again, so we have two pyramids here. Metabolic symptoms, which I don't have a good way to represent, so it's not shown, and then sedation. Next is olanzapine or Zyprexa. So that is shown here. So I have this plane and this zip line. It's all happening over land. They're flying over land. We're ziplining over land for olanzapine. This MOA is that it is a D2 and a 5-HT2 antagonist. It is adverse effects or orthostatic hypotension, which is not shown in the picture. Weight gain, hyperlipidemia is not shown. Hyperprolactinemia is not shown. Sedation, and then EPS. So this was a really hard picture to get everything in, so that's why there's some stuff missing. And then the next two drugs have the same MOA. So risperidone and ziprasidone. So those are shown right here with the ziplining lady. So she is ziplining for ziprasidone. And then she's holding a rye spear for risperidone. So this spear that she's holding has rye bread on top of it. So rye spear. And it is also the same as this one. So it's both of those are D2 5-HT2 antagonists. And their adverse effects are sedation, which is why there's a seed on the zip line. EPS, which is why there is a pyramid here and a pyramid here. And then the risperidone has, again, metabolic effects. The best thing I can come up with is that the tip of the spear is metabolic. That's all I got. And then the last drugs in this category, again, like they didn't have an MOA or adverse effects listed. They were just at the bottom of the screen. And so that's what the rest of this apartment is going on here. So we have this apartment complex and we have Laura who is outside and she is palpating her veggies. So Laura palpates her veggies. That's for lauricidone and palperidone. And then she has a fan in her apartment for Fanapt. That's the brand name. And then this other person just happens to have a giant sapphire stone in their window, sapphire for sapphirus, which I believe is also the brand name. Yep. So that was a rough one. A lot of stuff there. And then the last page that I have here is mostly review. So I'm going to go over the new stuff first, and then I will go through and review pictures that I've previously drawn. So, oh, and then this first thing on here is just a side note. The treatment for neuroleptic malignant syndrome, which is your EPS, is going to be dantrolene plus a benzodiazepine. In one of my drawings, I don't think I have a picture of it, but dantrolene was represented by a little kid named Dan, and he was jumping on a trampoline, and he broke his leg because he didn't have enough calcium intake. Because the MOA for dantrolene has something to do with calcium. And then we know all about benzodiazepines. So I'll talk about mood stabilizers in a second, and then mood disorders. Movement disorders. We have all these things we've already talked about. And then here are two new drugs that were mentioned. So we have valbenazine. So I have a Valentine that is bent, and we can't recycle it for some reason. Probably because I don't know, because it's bent. And so that is because the MOA is that it is a VMAT2 inhibitor, which reduces the recycling of dopamine, reduces dopamine recycling. So on this Valentine, which helps you remember Val and maybe VMAT, it says, "You're my best bud," because it's like a dope leaf, dopamine recycling. There's a big X here because it inhibits it. And then adverse effects are somnolence. So we have the little sleepy Z's here. And anticholinergic, we have a cactus. And then we also have tetrabenazine. So if you guys remember the game Tetris, that's what's being shown here. And there was no MOA or adverse effects given. So it's just another drug for movement disorders. So then for your people who have alcohol use disorder or are going through alcohol withdrawals, you have your benzodiazepines if they're having a seizure. That's lorazepam, diazepam, and Librium. You can also give them vitamins. So you're going to give them fluids, which you can use a banana bag. And then this picture just helps you remember what other vitamins should be given. So we have a magazine for magnesium. We have this little baby horse, a full for folic acid. This is someone's thigh for thiamine. Vitamin K, that's just because vitamin K is found in a bunch of leafy green vegetables. And then potassium, we have a banana, again, fluids, and then D5, normal saline. So D5 is like dextrose, so you want to give a little bit of sugar, but you want to do that after they've been given thiamine and fluids. And then, so the new drugs that we've learned about is disulfiram, which is brand name Antabuse. So I have an abused ant, and this is the ant from A Bug's Life. And he got punched in the face. He got abused. He's got a black eye. Abused ant, Antabuse. And this inhibits aldehyde dehydrogenase. And so if a person, so that is represented by this animal hide here, animal hide aldehyde. So if you take alcohol while on this drug, it's going to increase your acetaldehyde, and that's going to make you nauseous and probably vomit. And so it's just a deterrent from alcohol. Adverse effects are peripheral neuropathy. So that's why we have this nerve here, neuropathy. Hepatotoxicity, that's why we have the liver. And then optic neuritis, so an eye with the nerve, optic neuritis. And he is carrying alcohol just to help you remember that this is for alcohol use disorder. And then another drug for alcohol use disorder is a camprosate or camperol. So we have a campsite or a camprosite. And the MOA is that it increases the activity of GABA and it'll decrease the activity of glutamate. So again, we have some garbage for increasing GABA and then decrease glutamate. Glutamate I usually show by like glutes, a butt. I guess you can just think about how big this raccoon's butt is and how you're probably going to yell at this raccoon and say, get out of my garbage, and he's going to decrease his activity. I know that was stupid, but that's okay. So at this point, if you don't want to go over other drawings that I've done in the past, you could probably just end the video and not watch the rest of it. If you want me to show you other pictures, keep watching. So our mood stabilizers, we have divalproate, divalproex, lamotrigine, carbamazepine, oxycarbamazepine, and lithium. So I'm going to show you the pictures for those. So mood stabilizers. So this is our divalproex sodium. So we had a vulture sitting on a diving board, the diving board for divalproex, and it augments GABA. Adverse effects are hepatotoxicity, weight gain, nausea. Next was lamotrigine. So we had a green limo. So a limo that's green, lamotrigine. And there is a sign on the limo that's like, no streaking, don't hang your butt out. So inhibits the release of glutamate, your glutes, inhibits glutes. Adverse effects are rash, which is shown on this tire, dizziness, and sedation. Then we had our carbamazepine and oxycarbamazepine. So we have a maize made out of carbs, a maize of bread for carbamazepine, and the ox got stuck in the carb maize. So carbamazepine stabilizes sodium channels. That's why there's a sodium here within the channels. And then oxcarbamazepine is also a sodium channel blocker. So because the ox is stuck in the carbs, he's now blocking the whole thing. Adverse effects for carbamazepine are your rash, sedation, SIADH, he's very sad. And then BMS is bone marrow suppression. That's why you can see his bones. And then adverse effects of the oxcarbazepine is dizziness. So the ox is dizzy, nausea, vomiting. We have a vomit bag, nystagmus. He has wonky eyes, bone marrow suppression, sedation, SIADH, hypersensitivity. And then lithium, which we learned for headache, it can also be used as a mood stabilizer. So lithium, we have 2D batteries here because it inhibits D2 receptors. Also augments GABA. Remember, batteries shouldn't go in the garbage, so garbage GABA, and downregulates NMDA. Adverse effects are tremor, which is shown by these squiggly yellow lines, EKG changes, which is shown with these red lines, hypothyroidism, which is why there's a thyroid on the battery, and then polyuria and polydipsia. So just have some extra water droplets going on here. So those were all mood stabilizers. Now moving on to movement disorders, we have Benadryl, benztropine, artane, amantadine, and then benzodiazepines. So I will start with showing you Benadryl, which this is Ben Franklin holding a drill. Now this was all the way back from Heat and still early in the drawings that I've done, so they're a little bit different, but This is a anticholinergic antihistamine. And so I demonstrated that with these histamine, like H1, H2, with these handcuffs on them. And then anticholinergic, I had is like literally a colon with a little anti symbol on it. So yeah, so Benadryl is anticholinergic antihistamine. And its adverse effects are anticholinergic, so things like dry mouth, constipation, and urinary retention, and also things like confusion and sedation. And then other things for movement disorders, like I said, we have amantadine. So I thought that was like a man to dine. So this couple is having dinner by Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls because it pushes dopamine out of the substantia nigra. Adverse effects are hallucinations, peripheral edema. She has a big fat leg there. Orthostatic hypotension, and anticholinergic effects. I'm going through these fast because we already learned them. Here we have 3 pieces of artwork. So artwork for artane, and this one is a bent pine tree for benztropine, and these block acetylcholine, which is here. ACH, acetylcholine, blocks from binding to its receptor. Adverse effects are anticholinergic. So dry eyes, dry mouth, urinary retention, constipation, and confusion in the elderly. And then you had your benzodiazepines, which again, just a reminder, they augment GABA. They cause sedation and abuse potential and CNS depressants and can be a fall risk and also amnesia. And so we have a barbershop for phenobarbital. We have a clown for clonazepam. We have the Lorax for lorazepam. And then he is vacuuming for Valium. More benzodiazepines. And now I have to go back to this picture. Okay. So that was all for the movement disorders. And then some additional things for the alcohol use withdrawal and disorder. So that's why I showed the benzodiazepines again. Now I'm going to show you a reminder of what clonidine, baclofen, what some of those other ones are. So clonidine was one that we learned in our cardiac unit, and I showed it here by 2 cloned iguanas. So cloned for clonidine, and there's 2 of them because it's an alpha-2 agonist, and it reduces CNS outflow. You don't need to know the MOA because it's not in our PowerPoint. Baclofen is a shark with a fin on its back. Baclofen. It's going to be a GABA agonist. So there's garbage in the water. Adverse effects are sedation. And then I just wanted to show ondansetron, which we had learned for nausea and vomiting. So that's helpful in someone who's going through withdrawal, still for nausea, vomiting. So we had a granny who was dancing, ondansetron. She was doing the limbo, and the limbo was 5'3" because it is a 5-HT3 antagonist. Adverse effects are arrhythmias. She can't dance. She has an arrhythmia, and then headache. She's got lines around her head. So then we move on. Oh, naltrexone, which I'll show in the next one, I think. Drugs for opioid use disorder. These are also all things that we've already covered before. Actually, so I'll show you. Buphenyr, buphenyrphine, this one. When we learned it the first time, it had the brand name Suboxone. In this PowerPoint, it has the brand name of Buprenex, and it actually says that Suboxone is a combination of buphenyphrine and naloxone. So keep that in mind. But I previously had that these were partial opioid agonists or analgesics, and they worked on mu kappa delta receptors. So that's why we had like a partial sorority flag that had a cat that said meow for mu, and then a K for kappa, and the delta symbol. So they're partial opioid receptors or agonists. And then that's for buprenorphine. So just reading from my notes, adverse effects are headache, insomnia, and withdrawal syndrome. None of those are shown in this picture. And then Suboxone, like I said, is buphenyphrine plus naloxone or Narcan. So this is a narwhal on a can for Narcan. And this is also a partial opioid agonist. And its adverse effects are also headache, insomnia, and withdrawal syndrome. We have methadone, which is shown here as this lady who's like, I'm done with methadone. And this was part of our opioid analgesics. And then naltrexone. I'm just going to read from my notes because it's slightly different than what's here. So naltrexone is an oral, daily, or long-acting IM opioid antagonist. Adverse effects are nausea, headache, hepatotoxicity, injection site reactions if it's given IM. So that was all of them. I apologize for this whole last page because it might be kind of confusing. So you might want to look over your notes. But anyway, that is the end of part 2. Thanks for watching.